The year is 2022.
Uh-oh.
Maybe 2023, I can't remember. And we find ourselves with a new amateur genealogist. Let's call her Karyn. And she's loving her new hobby. Some call it an obsession, but she's been doing it for well over a year now. She's basically an expert.
Yeah.
But she's hitting a lot of brick walls in her own tree, and she wants that sweet, sweet high of a new tree. So she tells her friends that she wants to poke and prod in their trees and become a voyeur into their family DNA.
Mm-hmm.
Lucky for her good friend Kim said, just do mine. I don't care. I don't even like genealogy, so no problem. But then Kim said, can your first assignment be to prove or disprove that my family is related to the Jim Beam family of whiskey royalty? I'm Karyn Harding, an amateur genealogist, and I've spent an embarrassing amount of time and money unlocking the stories of the people who had to exist for me to exist.
And I'm Kim McMasters, a millennial with no interest in history, having kids, or leaving a legacy of my own.
And you're listening to Low Ancestry. Each episode, I'll share one story from my family tree with Kim, proving that ordinary people like me, with ordinary ancestry like mine, have compelling and sometimes scandalous or heartbreaking stories buried within them, because people have been messy for time immemorial. Welcome, Kim.
Welcome, Karyn.
And welcome back to the official second season of Low Ancestry.
Whoop, 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 whoop.
This season, we move away from my dysfunctional family and we fall right into the arms of your dysfunctional family.
Yes.
That's right. This season is going to be all about you, babes, and all about your ancestry. So how are you feeling?
Nervous.
Do you want to say more about that?
I know already. I mean, I know very little, but I know already that there's some tricky stuff.
It is probably going to be a pretty tricky season.
And a different season in terms of tone, vibe, feel.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it's true. So, I mean, I'm excited because getting to know your ancestry is just one more way for me to get to know you.
Oh.
And I can't wait.
Yeah.
But the other reason I'm excited is that sometimes when I'm deep in my own family history, I forget just how different every family tree can actually be. So while we find some of the same through lines of American history in your family tree as in mine, we're going to be looking at a very different kind of tree. And that's going to feel clear probably from the jump of today's first episode. And even though I just stated that you are not related to whiskey royalty, I did go into this episode believing that you were.
Yeah.
And I don't now.
Yeah.
But irregardless of the Jim Beam family, the family that we'll be speaking about today still holds a lot of those characteristics that I went in ready to talk about anyway. I named this podcast Low Ancestry, as avid listeners will know, because in the 1920s, a prison doctor in New York State diagnosed my third great-granduncle's proclivity for crime as low ancestry. And a lot of my tree, though not all of it, exemplifies that societal idea of low ancestry versus whatever the societal idea of high American ancestry is. And one of the glaring differences between my tree and yours is that your ancestry has actually not been very low. It's been, you're not the Vanderbilts.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not proclaiming that, but it has been really interesting to see how in a lot of ways your ancestry has been on quote, good American society, kind of like front lines of things. And I use quotes because that means a lot of different things that we'll get into.
Yeah.
And they've been that way for many, many generations. So in a lot of ways, your family history is full of people who were traditionally very successful. But don't get it twisted. I got in there and found the low ancestry lurking in between the visage of respectability.
Yes.
So this episode, we dive into some pretty classic examples of, quote, respectable historic families. And we also tackle a problem that has plaguing genealogy since the beginning of time, and that is wishful linking. Kim, do you know what wishful linking is?
I do know what wishful linking is. And we, I believe, talked about it with Michael from Roots and Roots.
Yeah.
I don't have the exact definition. I have a feeling you do.
Sort of, yeah. Do you want to just give it a stab, though?
Wishful linking is as I understand it, is sort of like formulating links in your ancestry to famous people that are likely not justified, or linking yourself to a famous person in your ancestry, even though like it's many, 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 many generations and like whatever away.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
You did it.
Okay.
You nailed it in one.
I gotta just acknowledge there's a definite vibe shift for me personally. I'm a little nervous.
Do you want to explain that feeling that's happening right now?
Because I don't know what's coming, and the implications of what we're about to talk about and how it has informed my life are going to be big. And I want to get into them, but I don't know. There was like it's a little bit easier. You know, we've talked about how, you know, there's the mythology of, you know, patriotism. The patriotic, what is it? What's
the patriot myth?
Patriot myth.
Yeah.
And all of the ways that ancestry, when it is sort of like high, or when there are like these grand stories, it can feel very like folklore, or it can feel, you know, we talked about that in the Viking episode. How it's like, this doesn't feel like real people. It feels like story. And with your family, I don't have a connection to your grandparents. I don't have a connection to your ancestors. So I was able to sort of process it as just a thing I was consuming. There are bigger implications for what we're about to talk about.
Yes.
For me personally.
Yes, it's true. And actually, to be fair, I'm a little nervous too, because it's not my family.
Yeah.
So your family could be listening to this and feel some type of way about it. So I'm going to do my best to, I mean, I came at my family last season, I think pretty fairly for the most part.
Absolutely you did.
Obviously, we popped off a couple times, but I think justifiably.
Yes.
And we may do that this time. I will say this episode, we're easing you in.
Okay, great.
We're easing you in if that helps. But yes, this season we will be talking about some heavy topics.
Yeah.
So coming in hot.
Yeah.
Wishful linking.
Wishful linking.
Which you did get correctly.
Which I did get correctly, but I was nervous about because I always feel like I have to get answers correct. Otherwise, I'm a problem.
Do we want to explore that?
No, we're doing fine.
But you got it right and you are good.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
So wishful thinking, it's the erroneous practice of like smushing people together into the same family tree just because it would be really great if they were, and not because there's hard evidence proving it. And when I started writing this episode, I was relying on a few public internet family trees that other genealogists have made that did link your family to Jim Beam's family. So in my defense, public trees are the conglomeration of many genealogists' work. And when a lot of people come to the same conclusion, there is a value in trusting it. I don't want to totally be like public trees are an enemy of good research. They are helpful, and it is helpful to know what a majority believes. So I did trust that info at first, especially in my first years as a genealogist. And then when I went into the true like evidence for this episode, I was thinking I would just find the primary evidence that proved that public tree. And I did not find that evidence. But I feel confident now more than ever that the connection between the two families is just wishful winking. Which is perfect because we're talking about Germans today.
Hey, perfect.
No, that it's wishful linking. But if you were connected, Johannes Jacob, I suppose if it's Johannes, it would be Johannes Jacob Beam.
Wow.
The founder of Jim Beam. He would be your first cousin 7 times removed if you were connected.
Oh, that's so many removed.
So every time there's a like such and such removed, it always sounds more distant than what it is. But what it means is that your 5th great grandfather, Jacob Beam, was alleged to be first cousins with Daddy Jim Beam.
Got it.
And you both share your 7th great grandfather as a direct ancestor. But with or without the patriarch Jim Beam.
Yeah. There it is. Let's tell it like it is.
You come from a family called the Beam family.
Yes.
So let's jump into their story.
Great.
So the Beams are a branch of the family that your mom comes from, and it was the maiden name of your great-grandmother. And I remember when I first started getting into genealogy, even before the podcast was but a dream in the eye of a giant, when I offered to look into your genealogy, this was the first thing that you mentioned to me. You wanted me to prove whether or not you guys were related to Jim Beam.
Right.
And my reaction to that was easy, no problem. And that alone proves the universe has a sense of humor, because what I've learned in my research is that the history of the name Beam is that it's a surname of a place, not of a family. So it means that hundreds of years ago, people were given the name just because they were all from the same place, not because it's unique to their family.
Got it.
So there are a lot of Beams out there, and it was never a given that you would be related to any and all Beams that are in America. So if the Beam surname is of a place, where the heck is that place? Kim, do you have any guesses?
Europe.
Nailed it. You get Beam from the letters Europe.
How is it spelled?
Beahm.
Yeah, that's one of the ones like over on that side.
Before I answer, we should do some housekeeping about the spelling,
yes.
Which yours has an H in it.
Yes.
Obviously, we know that the Jim Beam is spelled Beam.
Yeah.
That's the most Americanized of the spellings. Your family's way of spelling it is with H. But that's just one of the ways that it was changed when folks with that name came to America. But the way that it was spelled back in the old country was Bohm or Bohme with like an umlaut over the O. So it's not like an E sound. English doesn't have the same vowel as this, but it's similar to like an O sound. And if you really want to be correct about it,
yeah.
Karyn's Linguistic Corner. You would form your mouth to say the O sound, but then to try to pronounce the E instead. So you'd be like, yeah, that's perfect. Now do it all together because I can't. You're Berm. Berm.
We gotta keep that in.
But that can't be right.
Wait. Oh, boom. That is horrifying. That's so gross.
There's a German somewhere out there just like dying inside.
We're gonna have to consult our German.
I feel like last
friends.
season we insulted the French and the Dutch collectively.
We insulted a lot of
yeah,
people.
I think this time it's the Germans.
Ay.
So with this new spelling and pronunciation, do you have another guess? Bohme.
I don't know.
Well, the spelling is the clue. So Bohme, it means a person from Bohemia.
Oh.
Which makes a lot more sense.
Yes, it does make a lot more sense.
So at first, it would seem really difficult to go from Beam to Bohemia. But once you go Bohm, you're already there.
I forget that Bohemia is like a place because I just think about like boho chic.
Yeah, and that's not it.
And that's not it.
No, incorrect.
Yeah.
But the German word for Bohemia was Bowman.
Okay.
Pronounced the way that they would.
Got it. Okay.
So to know your family history, we have to know the history of Bohemia. And that takes us to the year 1618. Kim, would you like to hear what else happened in 1618?
This is my favorite part.
In 1618, Jahangir, the emperor of the Mughal Empire, which is modern-day northern India, he has an audience with representatives from the British East India Trading Company for the very first time, which is significant for them in that it was a long, horrible history afterwards. Also, the first Dutch newspaper is printed.
Cool.
Johannes Kepler discovers the third law of planetary motion. Don't ask me what that is. I could not explain it to you.
I could not either.
Okay, good. You had to check.
Yeah, I just had to run through the Rolodex.
Nope. Also, famed English adventurer and writer Sir Walter Raleigh is beheaded on the suspicion of treason against King James I. He's out.
He's out of there.
And then there's the reason that we're starting in 1618, which is the start of the 30 Years' War. That begins in 1618. And that is the bloodiest of the Reformation Wars in Europe. Do you remember what the Reformation Wars were about?
Yes, I do. We talked about them when we were talking about the Huguenots.
Yeah.
Take it away.
Okay. Basically, it's a series of wars, plural, about the differences between Protestantism and Catholicism.
Great.
And there were many of them, and it was very bloody. The 30 Years' War was the worst of them, started in 1618. Bohemia's claim to fame in this era is that this huge continental war actually started with them in an event called the Defenestrations in Prague. Do you know what defenestration is?
Defenestration, isn't that to throw someone out a window?
Yes.
That is hysterical. It sounds worse.
Yeah.
It sounds like toilet time.
Actually, interesting that you say that because the story is both window and toilet adjacent.
Wow.
Get ready.
I'm really starting to feel connected to my ancestors now.
I don't know if they were directly involved in this.
Oh, no.
So what happened was 3 representatives of the Catholic Emperor of Bohemia, they were chucked out of a window 70 feet off the ground by a Protestant count. He had ideas about overthrowing the emperor and taking it for himself. So these representatives, he just chucked them out.
Wait, like one by one?
Yeah.
Was he alone?
I don't know. I don't know that. I don't know all the like.
Do you think they were waiting in line? Like just accepting their fate and like, okay.
Maybe.
Wow.
I mean, that would be pretty cruel.
70 feet, you said?
70 feet. All 3 men survived the fall.
Whoa, what a bad result on all ends.
Well, the Catholics believe that the Virgin Mary and the saints saved them. And the Protestants believe a dung heap at the base of the window saved them.
One and the same, really.
Yeah. Ooh, Saint Slam.
Oh, Saints slam on slam.
Regardless, the event kicks off the Bohemian Rebellion and the Protestants try to take over the country, but they lose. And the 30 Years' War kicks off all over the continent. As a result of losing the rebellion, Bohemian Protestants had to get out of there. And where better to go than famously neutral neighboring Switzerland? So we've talked about in other episodes that Switzerland is, in the most simplistic of terms, had kind of a Lutheran half and a Catholic half. So they were definitely a place where religious refugees could go. So to German Switzerland, there were people coming from all over with all kinds of surnames. And when the Bohemian Protestants came in with all of their Slavic names, the tradition of calling like so-and-so person, that guy from Bohemia, became like, I don't know, Billy Boehm or whatever.
Oh.
So that stuck. And that's where Beam comes from as a surname.
Cool.
Yeah. So unfortunately for your particular ancestors, they weren't just your run-of-the-mill Protestants. They were also Mennonites. They first became Mennonites through your ancestor that eventually came to America. His name was Jacob Beam. We know that Jacob was from a Swiss family, but he was born in Germany in the area of the Palatinate in 1693. And the Palatinate is well known in American genealogy because it is the origin of a lot of early 18th century American ancestry. It's predominantly Protestant, and it's on the border with Catholic France. So it was indiscriminately terrorized and massacred in the religious wars of Europe. There's an account from Jacob's grandson later that Jacob's father was a blacksmith, and he had to do a journey through the countryside tour while he was an apprentice in Switzerland. And during his travels, he got caught up in the Pietist movement, which was like this really like strict form of Protestantism. But then the story is he spoke impertinently to a minister and was thrown in prison for heresy. Then he escaped prison and walked along the Rhine River until he came upon the area of the Palatinate, and he was then wooed by the Mennonites and he joined them.
Wow.
And so the family became Mennonites. The whole story itself, like we don't know how true any of it is.
Yeah.
But whether the Beams were Mennonites in Switzerland or they converted after they came to the Palatinate, they did become Mennonites. And although the Mennonites eventually removed themselves from Switzerland to flee religious persecution from the Calvinist movement, the Palatinate was not free of persecution due to its constant ransacking by neighboring France. So like many Protestants in the Palatinate, they emigrated to America. So it was just like a series of like leaving places due to religious persecution. Yeah. So first Bohemia.
Just being booted all over the place.
Then Switzerland, then Germany.
Man.
Just constant like getting kicked around.
Ouch.
Before we drive quickly past life in the Palatinate, I gotta let you know that it's here during this period that the Mennonites went through a few more religious schisms. So Mennonites were a schism from Protestantism. which was a schism from Catholicism. But there's one more very important one, which is where the Amish come from. So it's during this period where the Beams could have followed the faction of religious brethren who were trying to draw some pretty hard lines in church discipline, but they actually didn't. So that's how you, Kim, did not end up being Amish.
Phew.
Dodged a bullet.
Woo, boy, oh boy.
But it is interesting, believe it or not, where they emigrated to. So for my family, the Kilmers, they were given the opportunity by the Queen of England, Queen Anne, to go live in the recently British-controlled New York. And they wanted to fill it with bodies so that they could hold the territory against the Dutch and the Six Nations people who lived there. Right. And they also needed those bodies to do labor, making what they thought would be like the next great booming industry, pine sap. It was not. It was a huge failure.
Whoopsies.
that industry lasted one whole decade before everyone was like, this is not a good industry.
What did you use it for? What would they use
to keep
it for?
ships together.
Oh.
But it didn't work well.
Amazing.
But the Beams and other Mennonites, they didn't go that route. They immigrated at the same time and from the same place, but they actually received a different offer from famed Pennsylvania Governor William Penn, who wanted to offer them around 10,000 acres of land in the newly growing colony of Pennsylvania. William Penn, famous Quaker, was desperate for a place of religious tolerance. And lucky for him, King Charles II owed his dad money.
Yeah.
So instead of money, the king gave William some land in Pennsylvania.
Just oodles of land.
Yeah. And obviously it wasn't called Pennsylvania until William got there.
Yeah.
When he does get there, he makes treaties with the Lenape people to make sure that they don't attack him or his people while he builds on their land given to him by King Charles.
That is so
crazy.
Insane.
There's almost no chance that the guy who gave this land had ever even been there, which is insane.
That's nuts.
Mm-hmm. So the colony that William builds is meant to be a colony of religious tolerance. And apparently William once visited Germany before he came to America to visit the Quakers in Germany. But he also saw the plight of the Mennonites, the Anabaptists, and so forth, all the little schism groups.
There's so many schisms.
Yeah, I just think it was a really popular thing to do.
It's really annoying a little bit.
It is a little annoying because it's like the differences are fairly minute.
Yes.
But enough for people to get mad about it.
Like, why not just keep things a little flexible?
Never. So William makes a trade with the Lenape's neighbors, the Susquehannock people, to get even more land, and he offers that to the Mennonites. And in 1712, or possibly 1715, Jacob Beam, now a young man of 19 or 22, comes to America to a place called Pequea Township, just south of where Lancaster, Pennsylvania is today.
Ah.
There's actually some texts written by other descendants that claim Jacob decided to move to America because a man from one of the original 7 families of Lancaster gave Jacob a glowing review of the area. That man's name was Martin Kendig, and it just so happens that Jacob marries a woman named Barbara Kendig. So, and that's after he gets to America. Barbara's already been there.
Yeah.
Now, she may or may not be Martin's daughter. It's actually undetermined by records. There's no way she's not related to him, though.
Yeah,
so I think the connection between Martin being like, this place is great, to Jacob marrying Barbara Kendig is like, there's a straight line there.
There's a straight line.
So according to his grandson, when Jacob arrives, he establishes a blacksmith trade because Jacob's own father, as we know, was a blacksmith in Switzerland. Mm-hmm. And the grandson further relays that Barbara was a very industrious woman who he remembers would come to help her husband, quote, blow and strike when she had the time.
Oh, let's go.
So she helped with blacksmithing.
She must have been so strong.
I just picture like this large German woman with like her sleeves rolled up, just like, boom.
Yes.
Making horseshoes.
Barbara.
Jacob and Barbara have at least 12 children.
Ooh.
Which is just an obscene amount of beams.
That was the most authentic noise I've ever made. It was like an ooh, and also like
12 kids, worst nightmare.
That's too many.
It's too many. There's a lot of beams being thrown out into the world. And this is where we would have separated your line from the Jim Beam line. We would get into the interesting liquor history, which I will talk just a tiny bit about.
Because who doesn't love whiskey?
Probably the Mennonites.
Oh my God, that's a really good point.
Thank you. But before we go down that line, we're actually going to talk about a different branch of Beams that is famous in a different way.
Okay.
So it's not your line. Again,
Okay.
it's someone who's like brothers with your ancestor.
Yeah.
So Jacob and Barbara's second child, Martin Beam, is actually an important Pennsylvanian religious figure, if you can believe it. Martin becomes a Mennonite preacher, first in the tradition of his family's belief, but he becomes increasingly unsatisfied with their theology, and the theology specifically around the forgiveness of sins. This is likely due to one of America's first religious revivals, which is known as the Great Awakening, and it was all the rage during this time.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, would you like to see a picture of Martin?
Yes. Martin Beam.
Martin Beam.
Martin Beam. Wow. This is textbook if you look up like Amish.
Oh, yeah.
Or maybe just like Pennsylvania.
Like Pennsylvania religious man.
Yes,
Yeah.
Pennsylvania religious man.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's only half of a head of hair
correct.
and no mustache, but a big old long beard.
Mm-hmm.
Which, how do you feel about that just as a concept, style choice?
No stash, all beard.
Yeah.
I'm not like a huge fan.
Would you rather have all stash, no beard?
Yeah, for sure.
Interesting.
Why, you'd rather have no stash, all beard?
No, I think I'd rather have stash.
Yeah, I think so too.
Stash over beard.
Correct. Because otherwise it would look like this.
Yeah, but I don't want to give anybody ideas that like they should have a mustache because not everyone should have a mustache.
Yeah, it's like guns. You need a license.
You're going to keep that in?
Maybe.
Yep, it's like guns.
Yeah. He's
Yeah.
also in this picture holding a book and looking very scholarly.
Did you notice that I didn't pick up on the book at all?
You just cared about facial hair.
I was just looking at the hair.
Yeah. Well, he's holding a book.
Yeah.
And that's because he's a book guy.
He's a book guy.
Martin becomes an evangelical in his Mennonite circles. And he also becomes best friends with the founder of a church called the United Brethren in Christ. And this guy's name is Otterbein. Otterbein. Otterbein.
Bin.
And although he's still technically a Mennonite, Martin does donate some of his land that he inherited from his father to like the Methodists in the area.
Oh my God. Okay, so he's an evangelical Mennonite.
Who's like friends with this United Brethren in Christ guy, but then he gives land to the Methodists.
This is, can everybody just pick a lane?
No. So Methodism, that actually became the hot new denomination in England during this time. It honestly was not that old. And it scooted over to America. And on this land, they build a chapel that's called Beams Castle.
Whoa.
Beams Chapel.
I'm so much more excited about Beams Castle.
Well, it's not. It was a chapel.
Oh, man.
So he builds Beams Chapel, which becomes the first Methodist church in Lancaster County and the fourth Mennonite church in the whole country. The church is still there, by the way. You can go visit it.
Oh,
if you
cool.
want. Yeah. So eventually, the Mennonite church actually kicks Martin out for being too evangelical. And
Well, yeah.
he and his friend Otterbein, together, they form a new church. And the church is called the Church of the United Brethren in Christ, which is like a spinoff of what this guy was already doing.
Yeah, didn't they just add Church of?
Yes.
Okay, I feel like if anyone is listening, go back and do a drinking game where every time we bring up a new sect of religion, take a shot.
Yeah, you'll get pretty drunk.
And we'll see you tomorrow.
And make sure it's Jim Beam whiskey.
Since we're endorsed and all.
But actually, the Church of the United Brethren in Christ,
Yes.
that was actually the very first American Christian movement that was not transplanted from Europe.
Oh.
It's actually just the first all-American
homegrown, baby.
Homegrown.
Homegrown.
Which is kind of crazy.
Yeah. But like, does that really matter if they all came from?
Well, you're not going to get the connection to Jim Beam, so I really think you need to like take this.
Yeah, I need to get excitement here. Okay.
So something I also think is wild is that Martin founds a whole denomination But then while he founds this denomination, he joins the Methodist Church as a preacher at a Methodist church while he's forming a new church.
Okay, this is he is the problem.
Yes.
He is the problem.
He's the problem. So at the end of Martin's life, he is known for being like a very famous Methodist preacher and the leader of the Church of the United Brethren in Christ. So the latter church still is in existence today. I mean, so is the Methodist Church, but obviously we know that.
Yeah.
Martin's son, Henry, also becomes a famous Methodist preacher. The legacy of the Church of the United Brethren in Christ is actually a pretty good legacy, to be fair. They became one of the first churches to take a hard stance against slavery.
Oh.
And they banned any members from participating in the practice. So not all the churches did that.
Yeah.
Oof. They also founded a lot of universities and schools, one of them being Shenandoah University in Winchester, VA. Also, as a side note, if you are trying to look up Martin Beam, his line of the family actually ends up spelling their name Boehm as opposed to the Beahm.
Or Boom.
So that's the pious line. Let's talk about the liquor line.
Yeah.
And why I think it's unrelated. Here's what we do know for sure. Johannes Jacob Beam, the father of Jim Beam, was born in Berks County, Pennsylvania, to Nicholas Beam and a woman named Margaretta Myers in the year 1760. Nicholas Beam dies at the young age of 29, leaving a widow and 5 children behind. Margaretta moves to her brother Jost's plantation in Maryland, where the family cultivated tobacco as their primary cash crop. But they did receive some income from distilling and fermentation practices of fruit, like cider from apples. This was not an uncommon thing for a plantation to be adding to its repertoire of farming activities. Right. So Jost and Margaretta's younger brother, Jacob, took a keen interest in distilling as a way of making income. And Johannes Jacob Beam became Jacob Myers' little sidekick in the venture. And it was an uncle-nephew enterprise.
Oh.
But Jacob Myers wants to make it on his own. And so he sets off to the promise of wealth that America is saying lives on the other side of the Allegheny Mountains. And Jacob gets hundreds of acres there in the hopes of doing distilling.
Wow.
And a few years later, Jost Myers realizes that the soil in Maryland is not producing what it used to.
Yeah.
And he wants to join up with his brother. So the whole family decides to move into the Cumberland Gap area, including Jacob Beam, his new wife, Mary, who is Jost's daughter, and his cousin. So it's a whole family. I know, you don't have to keep track of all of them.
Okay, great. It's a lot of J names.
It's Jacob after Jacob after Jacob.
Yeah. The original.
Yeah, it's serious.
It's a ladder of Jacobs.
Jacob's ladder. So they all set up shop in Kentucky.
Yeah.
And Jacob sets up his distilling business just like his uncle taught him. And he distills the first barrel in 1795. He becomes a regional success really quickly.
Cool.
And then he sends his goods down the river by flatboat to river towns all the way down to New Orleans. And the rest is history. So let's back up to Jacob's father, Nicholas. He dies at age 29 in the year 1766. And the assertion made by public trees on websites like Geneanet or Ancestry and others is that Nicholas was one of the sons of Jacob Beam the immigrant. So that would make Nicholas your 6th great grand uncle. My assertion is that this is poppycock.
Ooh, tell me why.
For one, there is no primary document linking Nicholas as Jacob's son.
Okay.
Jacob's will names all of his other children, including his daughters, but not him. Of course, Nicholas died before Jacob did, but in that case, a lot of wills would name the grandchildren, and it didn't. This alone isn't enough to debunk it, of course. Nicholas's widow, Margaretta, moved to Maryland with the kids. Maybe he didn't know where they were, or maybe Jacob didn't think to will anything to an out-of-state family.
Yeah.
But my next point of evidence is that secondary documents and resources don't name him as Jacob's son either. So briefly, let me differentiate between primary and secondary sources, just in case. So a primary source, it's a firsthand account, like a birth record or a will or a diary. A secondary source is one that uses primary sources and then reports on them or is an interpretation of primary sources. So low ancestry is a secondary source.
Yeah.
Family genealogies are a secondary source.
Right.
There are a few books written in the 19th and 20th century on the genealogy of the Beam family. In all of those, Jacob and Barbara's children are all listed, and not one of them includes Nicholas. And I'm including the book written by Jacob's grandson, Henry, about his memories and his father's memories. They don't name him either, which I think is pretty important.
Yeah.
There's some other less compelling pieces of evidence, which is that Nicholas was tied to Berks County, Pennsylvania. And although it's still in Pennsylvania, it was enough counties away that level of distance from his family, it would have been notable that they were that far from each other.
Right.
And some sources say that Nicholas was born in Berks County, which makes that separation even more compelling. So Jacob is not known to have lived outside of like the Peckway area that we talked about. And then there's the matter of there is another or the same Nicholas Beam who was on the list of migration to Pennsylvania in 1752 after Jacob migrated. So this could also be the same Nicholas that came much later. And last, I think this is my last piece of evidence. I just have to really back it up.
Yeah. Yeah, of course.
Nicholas is noted as being a weaver by industry. Like that's his trade. And at this time in history, taking on a different trade than your father would also be very notable.
Yeah.
So Jacob was a blacksmith and a farmer. Right. And so his children took on blacksmithing, farming, or they were also preachers, which was in line with what they did.
Right.
So although these last few points are not compelling by themselves, start to add them all up together along with the lack of primary and secondary resources. And you have enough circumstantial evidence, I think, for a jury of my peers. Plus, when it comes to famous people or famous family branches, I believe that it is always more likely that when something seems hinky, it probably is more likely to be hinky because of the phenomenon of wishful linking, as we talked about.
Right.
So Kim, having heard all of my arguments, do you agree with me that Nicholas Beam is probably not Jacob's son?
Yes.
Okay. Great. I just needed to check it.
Yeah, I'm with you there.
Okay, good.
Great.
We've talked about a lot of different beam branches.
A lot of different beam branches.
But who are the beams we really care about?
That's the question.
Your beams.
My beams.
So one of Jacob's for sure sons was named John. He moved his family along with many other Pennsylvania German Mennonites and United Brethren to Shenandoah, Virginia. And I can't pin down just one explanation for why a bunch of Pennsylvania Germans wanted to populate Virginia. Some say it was because of the raids on their homesteads in Pennsylvania by local Native American tribes. Others point out that this area of Virginia has a lot of very valuable natural resources. And it also may just be that Lancaster, Pennsylvania was getting too populated. A group that like prizes their religious freedom and like private practice.
Yeah.
I think they wanted to be a little bit more remote about that. And so they did. And the Shenandoah area at this time still is kind of remote.
Yeah.
So this is the family branch that ends up being my favorite beam of all, Kim McMasters. And this family remained for many generations in Shenandoah until your great-grandmother, Nellie Esther Beam, she and her husband, William Wesley Lauk, made the move to the DC area where their family became a powerhouse of Fairfax County. And so, yeah, maybe it's not as flashy as being whiskey royalty.
Nah.
But you're sort of United Brethren in Christ royalty. And that's not nothing.
It's not nothing, but you know what? It doesn't fully align with my lifestyle. It's still remarkable.
But Jim Beam really aligned.
You know, I don't even like it that much.
Sorry, Jim. My resonance.
Yeah.
Is more about the cautionary tale of wishful linking. It is a universal truth that finding famous people in your family tree is an adrenaline rush.
Yes.
We talked about this in our episode, the Vikings episode that we did, where I refuted the fact that I was related to William the Conqueror, but it's so easy to get a whiff of an important connection and just like gun for the evidence that proves the connection. And it's just bad police work to start with the suspect and then go out and find the evidence that proves your suspect. Yep. You know what I mean? Everyone knows, start with the evidence.
Start with the evidence.
And I didn't do that.
Well,
and it just once more proves that I'm not immune to preferring the cool and crazy story or the relation to greatness over the bitter pill that is mundanity.
Right.
Also, how freaking cool would it be to hold up a bottle of Jim Beam at every party you go to and be like, here's my people?
Yeah.
Although, if you have Jim Beam at a party, like, look within.
Yeah. That wouldn't be the bottle that I bring to a party.
Yeah. It would be horrible to be, like, the girl who always brings Jim Beam.
It's not, like, bad.
You never feel good afterwards.
You don't feel good afterwards. It's just not my preferred.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we shouldn't slam, like, a multi-million-dollar company.
I mean, they are not going to worry about me.
Who am I to say?
They're not going to worry about me, I'll tell you that much. And this is my opinion, is that it's not my favorite.
Yeah. That's my resonance. It's very short. It's just that I learned another very valuable lesson while making this episode.
Mm-hmm.
And that is don't. What about you, Kim? Any resonance with this, your very first episode of your family?
I'm thinking back to when I asked you to investigate this. And I believe it was when my family, my parents, my brother and I were going to the Bourbon Trail as like a family trip, which was a wonderful trip. And we tried a lot of very good bourbon. And there is a running thread in my family of really liking things that are limited edition, loving to do like a taste test or a taste pairing. Like we just really savor variety in food and drink, especially, I think.
Your mom has bought you a lot of delicious limited edition treats that we all have enjoyed.
Best. Yeah. It's like they're wild and oftentimes not so good, but just the process of being like, here is a weird concoction that someone created. Yeah. You guys want to try this with me? Is pretty fun.
It's a fun thing.
And then you get to explore taste notes, with each other. I think we were like, this is not a story that's been passed down in my family. We just happen to be, exploring the world of bourbon distillation. Yeah. And we're curious about it. And also, I've always felt very connected to the Beam side of my family because I never met my great-grandmother, but I heard all the time growing up that, like, my brother had my great-grandmother's coloring, or like my great-grandmother loved magnolia trees, and my mom loves magnolia trees, and I love magnolia trees. So the things that I get from the Beam family are very, very like specific things. It's like, like there's color, there's like vivaciousness. It's not so much history. It's like passion and love and appreciation for flavors and flowers and whatever. So it's a nice connection to still just have that and be like, all right, we're not whiskey boys. That's fine. Yeah. I'm unfazed. And also if we were, again, like I'm not showing up with Jim Beam like, family booze, It'd probably just be like, okay, this makes sense. Yeah. And that's that.
It makes sense. So Kim.
So Karyn.
Not huge discoveries today. No. We're easing you into it.
Yes.
We will definitely get pretty heavy as time goes by.
I'm ready for it.
Some fun, some light moments, but a little heavy.
Yeah.
Get prepared.
I'm prepared.
You and everyone for a very, very exciting season. And as we've mentioned before, we'll still be putting out episodes every other Tuesday, but it may not be a flagship episode every week. We may, throw in a little new content here and there. So we will just see you guys next time.
Keep an eye out.
Keep an eye out. All right. I think that's it. I think we got to go.
Okay, great. Bye.
Okay, bye.
Low Ancestry is written and produced by Karyn Harding and co-hosted by me, Kim McMasters, with original music and audio engineering by Benjamin Malk. Original cover art was designed by Christina Swanson of Swansong Creative. Resources pertaining to today's episode and a link to the official bibliography can be found in our show notes or at our website, lowancestry.com. All research was conducted by Karyn, but she's been known to be wrong on occasion. So if you'd like to connect with Karyn or even send her a correction, you can email us at connect@lowancestry.com or find us on Instagram @lowancestry. Genealogy is, after all, a community effort. Thank you so much for listening, and if you like what you hear, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love to hear from you, and frankly, we really need this.